So, a few other YouTubers and I are making videos about why we're still Catholic. And so, this video is really just my story. So, I grew up Catholic, and my faith was always there, but it wasn't necessarily something that was important to me. I went to church every Sunday, and my dad prayed with me every night before I went to bed, but that was about it. And when I went into high school, I started to go to my youth group. And I went for the girls and for the food, but it got me there. And I kept going, and the summer after my freshman year of high school, I went on this retreat called the Steubenville Youth Conference. And at this retreat, there's a time where you have 3,000 to 5,000 people kneeling down in adoration, praising the Lord. And that was really the first time that I truly felt God's presence in my life. And so going into my sophomore year of high school, I started to take my faith more seriously. I helped out at the youth group more, and I started intentionally trying to have a relationship with God. And so the next summer, I went to a different conference called a search retreat. This weekend retreat that only was for juniors and seniors in high school. And on this weekend, it was truly the first time that I felt like people loved me for me. You see, when I was growing up, I had Tourette syndrome. And I still have it, but it just doesn't affect me as much. But when I was younger, I was throwing my neck back all the time. I couldn't control it. And I went on all kinds of different medicines. One actually finally stopped my Tourette's fully. But it made me gain 10 pounds in under 2 weeks. And so I had to go off the medicine. And I tried a bunch of different medicines, nothing worked. And so I went back on it with another medicine to stop the weight gain. And I wasn't gaining weight, but I couldn't really lose weight either. And so I was at this odd point in my life, and at the time my mom was kind of in a weird place too. She had gone through cancer and she beat cancer, but after going through that she was just kind of wiped for the next 2 years, exhausted, and I was in this weird place. And so I started to purposely do bad in school to try to get my mom's attention. And I got her attention, but it wasn't the attention I needed. And so it kind of broke our relationship for a little while. And so going into 8th grade, I had lost 14 pounds. I grew 5 inches. I started to learn to control my Tourette's. I started wearing my contacts and got rid of my braces. And so I looked very different. But I was still that chubby, awkward Tourette's kid. That's how I saw myself. And so, fast forwarding to my sophomore year of high school, that really meant a lot. That for the first time, I truly felt like people loved me for me, and I truly started acting like me, not hiding who I was to everyone else. And so after that conference, I went on another. The Steubenville Youth Conference, I went on it again. And on that weekend, I just really felt a strong call of the priesthood. And at the end of the weekend, there's a time where you can go forward if you're discerning a vocation, and so I went forward. And I came back and we're singing praise and worship, the weekend's ending, we're hitting these beach balls around. And I said a weird prayer to God. I looked up and there wasn't a beach ball within like 300 feet of me. And I said, God, if you really want me to discern the priesthood, basically send me a beach ball. And I closed my eyes and I put my hands up in the air. And less than a second later, one landed in my hands. I didn't catch it, it just landed. And I was like, okay, God. And so throughout my junior year, I started praying about this, and looking back on it later, I just fought God for a year. And at the end of the year, I was talking to my friend Jake, and I told him, I think this time next year, I think I'll be going to seminary. And I thought that at the time, but then I felt like God stopped calling me. And I started figuring out what I was going to do next. And so I was on the way back from a red and white football game with my dad, and he asked me, so what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I don't know, I guess I'll do business or something, but if I could have my dream job, I'd be a speaker for Catholic youth conferences. And he's quiet for like a whole minute, and then he just goes, why not? And it never occurred to me to that moment that that's something I could actually do. And so I started looking into it. I started seeing where I wanted to go to school. So a few weeks later, I went on another Steubenville Youth Conference. And on the Friday night of it, I was kneeling down in adoration, and I heard this voice in my head say, stand and lead. And at first I'm thinking, this is my own head. This isn't God. But after a few minutes, I'm like, okay, wait, I'm thinking about this. I'm not thinking this. So I'm like, okay, God, maybe this is you, but I don't want to be the first person to stand up out of 5,000 people. Well, a few more minutes go by, and I'm like, okay, God, fine. So I stood up. And less than 10 seconds later, the entire stadium followed my example. And so the rest of the weekend went on, and I heard a lot about Franciscan University. And I thought it would be a good fit, especially for me trying to be a speaker for Catholic youth conferences. It's a great Catholic college in Ohio, actually where the Student Youth Conference was started. And at the end of the weekend, I said, God, if you really want me to go to Franciscan, basically send me a sign. And a minute later, I was one of 2 people to win a Nexus 7 tablet and a Franciscan University t-shirt. And I was like, okay, God, wow. And so I started to, after that retreat, I started to try to listen to God more. I was in my room one day, and God told me to put $20 more in my wallet. And I'm like, that's weird. That's not God. And I went to my youth group, and sure enough, I needed $20 more for a t-shirt. And so I just started trusting that he was talking to me and listening to me. And so one day I was like, God, well, if you want me to go to Franciscan, basically, we need the money. Like, my family's broke. And he sent me Cutco cutlery. I started selling for them. In my 3rd week on the job, I was number 6 in the nation in sales. I sold like $6,037 worth for the week. And I was like, okay, God, cool. I was supposed to be an assistant manager the next summer. He was working it out with scholarships. And I'm like, okay. So I moved on with my senior year. And during December, I was on a search team, actually. And at this retreat, on the Saturday night, I was standing there with my parish priest. We were in adoration. I'm just covered in incense, holding the little thingy with incense coming out. And I'm standing there, and I really felt a strong call to the priesthood again. And during the weekend, it made sense. Any potential relationship I could have had in high school, I swear God screwed up. Because he knew if I was in a serious relationship, I never would have gone to seminary. But while it made sense during the weekend, after that weekend, I was just pissed off at God for about a whole month. Well, the month went by, and I went to this come and see retreat. And on the weekend, I went to confession, and I was telling the priest my struggle. And he told me, he goes, you can't put too much pressure on yourself, and you can't put too much pressure on God for an answer. And he said, for penance, I want you to go pray in front of the Blessed Sacrament for 5 minutes. And I'm kneeling down in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And I'm saying this prayer, and I'm saying, God, I know what you want from me, but I don't know. And he cut me off. And I had this vision in my head that I was speaking in front of the Student Youth Conference. And I looked at my collar to see if I had a Roman collar on, and I did, and then I didn't. It kept flashing between a normal collar and a Roman collar. And at the time, I took it as, well, maybe not now, but maybe one day priesthood. Keep heading towards Franciscan. And that's what I needed. If he had shown me the Roman collar, I would have turned the other way. And so I continued with my senior year. And right before the end of it, I was going to Virtues training, protecting God's children, because I was coaching my little brother's summer basketball team that summer. And on the way home, a friend's mom gave me a ride home. And she was asking me about Franciscan, and she asked me if I ever discerned the priesthood. And so I kind of told her my story. And ever since that Student Youth Conference I had last been at, I really had started to talk to God every day and hear him and ask him in every way, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? Well, I'm talking to this lady, and she goes, your relationship with God really reminds me of a priest I heard about on the radio. That when he was discerning the priesthood, God kept saying, he would speak to him on everything else, but he would never answer him when it came to that. And so finally, this guy said, God, if you want me to go to the seminary, say nothing. And now he's a priest. And I'm like, I got home and I started thinking about this. I'm like, God, how could your answer be nothing? But finally, I'm standing in my kitchen. I said it, God, if you want me to go to the seminary, say nothing. And while there were no words, it was just this immense peace, the greatest peace I'd ever felt at that time. And so I emailed my vocation instructor and I said, I think God wants me to go to seminary. And I met him a few weeks later. He was in Rome at the time. And while we met, one thing he told me is he kind of asked me about my discernment process. And he told me a year before, when I told my friend Jake I thought I'd be going to seminary this time next year, and then I stopped feeling his call. Well, what he told me I did wrong was I didn't come speak to him. I didn't come speak to my pastor. I basically said, okay, God, I'll say yes, but you got to do all the work. And so God kind of took me on a journey my senior year to get me back. And so I got accepted to seminary, and I had a week and a half to do 90 pages worth of paperwork, a 10-page autobiography, and like 3 doctor's appointments. And that summer, I served on an evangelization team going to different parishes for 2 weeks across Arkansas. And then I went to seminary. I went to Holy Trinity Seminary in Dallas. And while I was there that first semester, I actually got really depressed. I was struggling with the realization that I would never be married. I would never have kids, because I truly thought God was calling me to be a priest. Well, over Christmas, I almost didn't go back. But through prayer, God got me to go back, and I told my parents that I was really going to discern correctly, because I realized I hadn't been praying about it. I had basically tried to force myself to do God's will because I was afraid that if I even prayed about it, I would do my will and leave seminary, go get married, go have kids, go do whatever. But I went back and I was going to pray about it the right way. And so I was on this 5-day silent retreat, and the first day, God actually told me to write a letter to my future wife. And I'm like, okay. Like, I had heard about this speaker who, when they were 16, they were at actually the Student Youth Conference, and this certain speaker told them that you're supposed to pray for your future spouse. And so this woman, she started writing letters to her future spouse. And on her wedding day, she told her husband, I've been praying for you since I was 16. Well, it turned out he had been to the exact same conference and been praying for her since the same day. And so the idea of writing a letter to a future wife wasn't weird to me. It was weird to me because I was in seminary. But anyway, I wrote the letter. And at the end of it, I was like, okay, God, this doesn't necessarily mean you're calling me to marriage. Maybe it was just to help get things off my chest. And so later that week, I wrote another one. And so at this point, I finished the silent retreat. It's a week later, and school's about to start in 2 days. And on Mondays, we always had adoration. And I was finishing the TV series Chuck for the second time. And I just finished the series finale. Like, finished it, had to sprint down the hallway to get to adoration. I ran in, got to my kneeler, kneeled down as the priest came in and put Jesus in the monstrance. And I'm sitting there for the first time, or kneeling there for the first time in months, not thinking about my vocation, but thinking, man, that series finale is beautiful, yada, yada, yada. And it was in that moment that I just felt God say a resounding yes in my heart to marriage. And the second thing he told me was to tell my friend Mason and my friend Joseph, 2 friends from seminary. And at that point, we weren't even that close. What was funny, 2 months later, we went on a spring break trip where we went from Dallas to Little Rock to Fayetteville to Tulsa, Oklahoma City, down to Galveston, Houston, and back up to Dallas to see each other's families and to hang out. And at a certain point when we were in Galveston, my friend Mason asked me, he goes, why did you tell us? I said, honestly, because God told me to. That was it. He told me to, and he knew that I needed people there to help guide me in that. And the third thing in that moment, he told me yes, he told me to tell my friends those things, and then the third thing he said is, by the way, you're staying here this semester. Because he knew me. I didn't like the University of Dallas, and great school, I didn't like it. And he knew I would want to leave. And so I continued there, and in that time I started to doubt, and all these different things came in. Well, 2 months later, it was March, and I'm on another weekend retreat, another silent retreat. And I'm sitting out on this dock, have my feet up, just talking to God. And I'm sitting there just joking around with God, and I say, hey God, what's up? And he goes, I am. And just, God being ridiculous. But my formator from seminary came over, and he put his hand on my shoulder. And he goes, so, are you still leaving? And I simply said, yeah. But I just felt God behind me in that moment, that he was behind this decision. And so that was really the moment that I truly felt for sure that God was calling me to marriage. And so I finished out my semester at seminary, and I had a great semester. I played like 2 hours of ping pong a day, hung out, had a good time. And at this point, just a little bit about my relationship with God. One day I was sitting there praying, and I was in the middle of praying, and God goes, leave. And I'm like, what? And he goes, leave. And I'm like, okay. So I got my stuff together, closed it up, and I walked out, and right at the last second, I ran into someone who he wanted me to talk to. And so at this point in my life, and really starting at that Student Youth Conference before my senior year of high school, I really was talking and hearing God in every moment. And so going to that summer after my freshman year of college, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. And one day I was mowing the lawn, and I was listening to a Jason Everett video, and he mentioned net. And I had heard about this thing called net when I was like 15 at this conference with 23,000 people at Colt Stadium. These people on net came and spoke to me, and at the time I'm like, there's no way I'm ever going to do this. Well, I'm mowing the lawn hearing this, and he's just telling this story about these people on net. And I'm like, God bugged me for 2 weeks to look into this. I didn't even remember what net was. I just knew what it was. And I just literally typed in net to Google, and I found Net USA. And I watched this 5-minute video. And in this video, of all the people who have ever done net, I only knew 2 people who had ever done it. And one was a girl from my parish, who I knew she did missionary work. I didn't know it was net. And another guy I went to seminary with, who I didn't even know did net at the time. But he's a 6'5" white guy, and sure enough, in 1 second of this video, he walks by with a chair. And I rolled my eyes, and I rewound it a few more times, and I rolled my eyes at God, and I said, okay, let's do this. So I walked upstairs. I said, Mom, there's a random ministry online God wants me to do. And she's like, okay. And I had the last interview weekend in Minnesota. And there's only 5 guy spots left. And so I was on the way to this weekend, and we're on the way to the airport, and we almost hit debris in the road. And my mom goes, the devil's trying to keep you from net. And I go, I'm making net, and I'm making a traveling team. And she goes, don't be cocky. And I'm like, I'm not cocky. I just know if the devil doesn't want me to, God does. So we get to the airport, and all flights got canceled through Chicago for the next 2 days. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I called my mom, and she goes, I'm not going anywhere till we go to Mass. And so we went to like this 9th day of a novena on Masses. And then she drove me 15 hours to Minnesota. So at this point, me and my mom, we've mended things. We're in a good place. She's willing to drive me 15 hours. And I get there, I get accepted to net literally a day and a half later. And I had 18 days to fundraise $5,000. And on my flight from, I flew from Minnesota to Chicago, and then Little Rock to Chicago, Chicago to Minnesota. On my flight from Chicago to Minnesota, I got an email saying I was fully funded. And they would have let me fund later, but God just made it work. And day 2 in net, my dad texted me and he goes, is this something you want to be a part of in the future? And I'm like, I don't know, I just got here. But then I asked God about it, and he goes, you're not going anywhere. And I'm like, what? He goes, you're not going anywhere. Sure enough, I did a 2nd year in net. Well, without going into all the details, you can watch one of my other videos about actually a car accident I was in on my first year. But net was huge for me. I started seeing God in every moment. And I went out and I spoke about him every day. And I came back and I did a 2nd year, and there's a lot of healing there. And I grew in a lot of natural ways. And while this is a lot of my story, there's a lot more to it that I'll keep bringing up in different videos. But I guess this is my long and drawn out way of saying that the reason I'm Catholic today is that I couldn't even imagine my life if I wasn't. Because while I grew up and he wasn't a major part of my life, now he's in every little bit of it. Life just doesn't flow without him. It's like every second is guided by him because I'm asking him to guide me. And so this is kind of my story. Thank you if you've made it this far to the end of the video. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, or if you have any videos you want me to make, any ideas, please comment below. Please subscribe, like this video, and share it with others, that maybe my story can help affect someone else. Know that I'm praying for you, that I love you guys. Amen.